12 new Rise of Shadow cards to talk about, including Jepetto Joybuzz, a new neutral legendary.
Hey, buddy, watch this.
That's right, lots of new cards have been revealed, and I've even got to jump back and get some I missed. That said, if you're short on time, there is a quick reviews link in the description that will take you to my 5-star ratings. You can just see all the cards real fast. Otherwise, let's jump into the detailed reviews. Up first here, let's talk about Jepetto Joybuzz. And I think it's pretty clear where they got the inspiration for this character's hair. But he's an 8-mana 6/6 neutral legendary with a battle cry that reads, draw 2 minions from your deck, set their attack, health, and cost to 1. So, who knew this character was coming? It's kind of a play on Jepetto and Pinocchio, right? Creating these little toy versions of your minions. That's really cool flavor. The question is he going to be good? And there's 2 ways to think about this card, right? Way number 1 is the sort of straight up way where normally drawing a couple minions and setting their attack and health to 1 wouldn't be particularly valuable because an 8-mana 6/6 is a slow thing with bad stats. Traditionally, you wouldn't want to play this card. But, of course, when you start to think about combo potentials or these really crazy, sneaky things that you might be able to achieve, say, for instance, setting like an Alexstrasza or a Malygos or an Archmage Antonidas, to just cite a few examples, setting those to 1 cost, because you may not really care about their attack and health as much, could be ridiculous. Setting up some absurd Malygos combos, setting up infinite fireballs, or at least multiple fireballs off of Antonidas. Those start to look like possibilities with a card like Jepetto Joybuzz. The challenge, of course, will be making sure you don't draw those cards first, because if you draw them before you play your Jepetto, then of course they won't be receiving the discount. But with decks that can shuffle things back into your deck, cards that do that, it might still be possible to add some consistency. So, I look at a card like Jepetto Joybuzz and straight up, it doesn't look great. 6/6 for 8 is disappointing. You don't actually like setting things to lower attack and health most of the time, but in those combo scenarios where this card was clearly designed to live and to operate, I think he's pretty promising. I don't know exactly what a combo like that would look like right now, but because he does something so singular and so focused and creates those opportunities, this will probably at some point be a card we see in competitive play in Hearthstone. So now let's talk about my card, Vereesa, Windrunner, new Hunter, legendary, 7-mana 5/6, Battlecry, equip Thoradol, the Stars Fury, and that is a 2/3 weapon, which reads, after your hero attacks, gain spell damage +2 this turn, and since that's a 2/3 with 3 durability, that means theoretically you can gain +2 spell damage 3 turns in a row, including the turn you play Vereesa herself. So lots of crazy opportunities with this card, right? Could be a raw face damage card where you just set up to hit for some big time kill commands the following turn because they're all going to have spell damage +2 and theoretically hit for 7 damage each with a beast on board. That could be ridiculous. You could even use this more in a control fashion where you're using it to empower your multi-shots or explosive shots or some other cards we may not have even seen yet. Because it is a 7-mana cost card, it's going to come pretty late in the game, so a hyper-aggressive deck might feel like it's a little bit too slow, particularly because it takes 3 turns to really express all the value. I think the opportunities, like I said, are big. Like, clearly, if this works and when it lines up, it's going to do some really crazy things, right? Like, 3 straight turns of an oppressive spell damage like that's valuable. But I think the card has a lot of hurdles to overcome. First up is weapon removal. It might only get to go off once because your opponent just kills it with an Acidic Swamp Ooze right off the bat. That's a big challenge, and then you're left with kind of a 7-mana 5/6 and maybe just a mana or 2 or 3 to get the spell damage value, which will probably make it feel like a bad play. Beyond that, it does take 3 turns to get all of the value out of it. Maybe you only need 1 or 2. That's a possibility, but if it takes all 3, it's a really slow card for an aggressive deck again, so that points me a little bit more towards like a control spell damage style. But then again, spell damage and control maybe doesn't feel as good either. And then finally, one really small problem perhaps is that you do have to attack with the weapon. So if your opponent plays like some giant high attack taunt and you have to attack into the taunt, you might accidentally kill yourself or not really be able to utilize your Thoradol to its full extent because you just can't get an attack off successfully. So, there are a few kind of checks and balances on the power level here, which I think will keep this card in a really healthy place. I think it looks okay, and there might be a deck that really wants to use it. Maybe some spell damage variant, maybe some cheap spells come out that really help with this, because the cheaper the spells are, the more you can get that immediate return on your spell damage out of this card. So if some of that stuff comes along, yeah, Vereesa Windrunner could absolutely see play. But I don't think she's the sort of card that just goes in every hunter deck. I think she has far too many counters and weak points for that. So I would say a good card, not a great one, but still one of my favorites because, I got to reveal her and she's a famous WoW character. So pretty excited regardless. So up next here, we have Unleash the Beast for Hunter, a 6-mana spell. It's got Twin Spell, and it reads summon a 5/5 Wyvern with Rush. So, this is another card that just looks very straight up and obvious. A 5/5 with Rush is a solid play. It's not the sort of thing that's going to make anybody lose their mind with how good it is, but it takes a quick trade. Maybe it leaves behind a body. In a lot of ways, it's probably comparable to something like Baited Arrow, where you kill a little thing and you leave behind a pretty solid-sized minion. It's worse than Baited Arrow in some cases, perhaps a little better in others, but it is a 6-mana card. That's a challenge for Hunter. Like, Savannah Highmane has historically been their big 6-drop. Rexxar in the past. Clearly, they're going to need some replacements, but I don't know that most decks really find a home for Unleash the Beast. Even if you compare it to, like, To My Side from the past, like, that felt way better than this probably, too. It just kind of fills that gap of, like, it's okay. And the fact that it's Twin Spell is important for Hunter, right? Hunter is a class that historically has had a lot of problems with resources. It's hard for them to keep cards in hand. Twin Spell means you get to do this twice. So 2 straight turns, you're just using 1 card, which can help you gain a little bit of card advantage, which could be important. But then again, just at the end of the day, I don't know if this card's impactful enough or valuable enough. It's 12 mana to really fully realize all of it. You get a couple 5/5s with Rush, which are probably, again, okay plays, but just not amazing. So at the end of the day, yeah, I think this could see play in a deck here or there, but it's not going to be one of those staple Hunter cards. It's, again, probably just good, but not great. So now let's move on to Keeper Stalladris, a card I do think's a little stronger. This is a new Druid legendary minion, this cool-looking crystalline Keeper dude. He's a 2-mana 2/3, and he reads, after you cast a choose 1 spell, add copies of both choices to your hand. So notably, this is only spells. I've seen a lot of people think it was with minions as well, just with spells. So if you pull up like Power of the Wild, for instance, with Keeper Stalladris on board, you're going to get a 3/2 Panther, and you're going to also get a +1/+1 buff, both of which will be 2 mana. And what that means is, you get cards out of Keeper Stalladris. He's almost like a card generator, a card resource generating tool. He's not, influencing tempo at all. He's just a 2-mana 2/3, which is a fine stat line. But, if you play a couple different choose 1 effects the same turn as you drop a Keeper Stalladris, you might generate 2, 4, 6 cards in hand, all of which have, effects that you probably like. If you think about Wrath, for instance, deal 1 damage and draw a card. That's really good. Deal 3 damage is great. It's fine. Like, these are all things you want to be doing with your cards anyway. So he's probably going to help you contribute to your game plan. There are also bigger cards like Nourish, where maybe you get to draw 3 more consistently, or you could get multiple instances of ramp. Not that you'd probably really need multiple instances of ramp, but it's a possibility. So for me, I think Keeper Stalladris makes a lot of sense. Like, you just want to generate stuff, he could do it. He could work in a token deck, even getting like multiple Power of the Wild buffs. He could certainly work in a slower deck that's just looking to create a lot of different resources. And the cool thing is, we don't know what choose 1 effects are even going to exist. There will be more added, I'm sure, and they'll be cool, and they'll empower Keeper Stalladris even more. So absolutely, a card like this looks promising just because his stats work. He's so cheap, you can toss him into tons of different turns. And he creates a lot of resources, and that means you can do cool things and do things that otherwise might not be possible. So absolutely, I think this card will find some degree of play just because he's so easy to toss into a deck, and he just works with what Druid's trying to do. So really strong card. So now let's move on to Bronze Herald, a new Paladin Dragon. I think we might have the makings of a dragon archetype in Paladin because we also have this card, the Dragon Speaker, to keep in mind. But first up, the Bronze Herald is a 3-mana 3/2 dragon with a death rattle that adds 2 4/4 dragons to your hand. So we have here another slower resource generating card, right? This is not going to be the strongest tempo play on turn 3, but it's adding a cool couple dragons to your hand, which are going to be 4-mana 4/4s, which is important because they do allow you to play on curve, theoretically. If you play your Herald on 3, Whether it dies or you take a trade with it going into turn 4, you'll have an on-curve dragon to play. Also, as we can see with the Dragon Speaker, which we'll talk about more in a second, having dragons in hand can be important with some dragon hand buff cards, apparently, that are coming. Who knew? At least one. So, a couple advantages here to this Death Rattle. And I have to say, I've actually played this card in the single-player adventure mode. It felt better than I expected. Like, if I looked at this just objectively, I think it's kind of slow. It's not tempo-based. It's resource-based. Stat line for 3 is not great. But, you know what? Like, as a package, just making sure you have a smooth curve and have stuff in hand, it actually seemed pretty solid. Now, I don't know how that's going to convert to competitive Hearthstone play, right? It might not be nearly as good at a competitive level as it was in a single-player mode, but I have a little bit of hope for a card like this and the new Dragon package, and we've seen some Dragon cards in the past for Paladin as well. So, who knows? Maybe a Death Rattly hand buffy Dragon thing could work. And I don't think this card's going to be the strongest part of that if it does take off, but I think it's acceptable. I think it's okay. It has the potential to just create a lot of stuff. And if your deck needs resources, a card like this could help. And you'll note here, for the past few cards we've talked about, they're often about generating resources in hand as opposed to really strong board influencing swingy tempo plays. And I think that denotes a bit of a shift in the design philosophy, slowing down Hearthstone, not from like an aggro versus control standpoint, but just from like a power level standpoint. Like, not as many things are doing as much crazy stuff. It's taking a little longer for them to be powerful. You know, it's not infusing the board with just ridiculous output immediately. It's taking a couple turns to suss out some of these resources, and I think that's a good design trend. Like, in the past, we had the opposite problem. Things were just going crazy all the time. Cards like this and, you know, the previous one all signal the game taking a slightly more leisurely pace, which I think is probably a good thing. So, Bronze Herald, not only an okay card, but a card that signals some interesting trends perhaps in the game. So now let's talk about Dragon Speaker, a Dragon Synergy card here for Paladin. 5 mana, 3/5 Battle Cry. Give all dragons in your hand +3/+3. So a couple things to this card. The stat line, a little underwhelming for 5 mana, right? I mean, 5 health is nice, but 3 attack at that point is not going to be too impactful. So clearly a little bit of a sacrifice made here from a standpoint of stats. But this Battle Cry is kind of crazy. Now, we've seen hand buffs in the past not work very well, right? Clearly, multiple times in Paladin, even in Warlock a little bit with like Hyreek, it's really hard to buff things in hand and turn that into a powerful sort of play. So that's probably a bad sign for Dragon Speaker right off the bat. But if you look at this one, it's a little different. It's going to give all the dragons in your hand a buff as opposed to just like one at a time, and it's +3/+3, which is way bigger than we've seen in the past. Usually it's like +1/+1 to all minions in your hand. Now, this is only dragons, but if you're running this deck, you'd obviously just have a lot of dragons in your hand. Clearly, the previous card also means you're going to get a couple 4/4 dragons in your hand, which very quickly become 4 mana, 7/7 dragons in your hand. And that could be a problem, right? Even after turn 5, when you're playing those like turn 6, turn 7, 7/7s still demand a little bit of attention. So I can see a little package forming there. And obviously, those aren't the only dragons you're going to have. You're going to have your typical dragon package as well, all of which is just going to be more frightening, right? Just bigger, scarier. And you're only sacrificing a little. So I kind of think Dragon Speaker looks like the right way to do hand buff, or at least the powerful way to do hand buff cards, because it's significant enough that the sacrifices now might make up for it. If you can stabilize, particularly behind like taunt dragons and stuff, the stats are going to add up and they're going to be impactful immediately. So I think this card actually has promise. And again, I did play this a little bit at the Blizzard Summit I was at, and it felt pretty good. Like, it felt stronger than I thought. I would probably have rated these cards lower if I hadn't played them firsthand, but I was surprised at how tight they felt and how competitive it felt. So I think there's some promise here. Do I think this is going to be the dominant archetype for Paladin? No. Do I think it's going to work right away? Not even necessarily, but given the lower power level in Hearthstone, it could, and certainly over time, as more dragons move into the pool, something like this is a deck we kind of have to keep an eye on. I think the possibilities are there. So is Dragon Speaker going to be a powerful piece of that puzzle? Perhaps he will. So now let's move on to a Paladin secret here, Never Surrender, including the beard here was inspired by mine as well. Well, maybe not. I wish. This is a 1 mana spell, of course, as a secret for Paladin, and it reads, when your opponent casts a spell, give your minions +2 health. And I think as far as secrets go, this is a pretty strong one. I think we've seen in the past anything that affects the stats of your minions on board, or at least influences the board at all, or the kinds of paladin secrets that have been most successful, right? It's those that are like drawing you a card, or eye for an eye, that's more face oriented, that aren't as powerful. It's really the ones that are influencing the board you care about. And this one influences the board, and Paladin can certainly have a lot of minions, so this could result in quite a few different health buffs hitting. Not only that, I think the trigger here is a pretty easy thing to trigger. Opponents are often playing spells, and they might be trying to use spells to destroy your big wide board of stuff, and this sort of counters that immediately. So there are a couple reasons I think this card actually looks solid for a secret. Now, at the end of the day, secrets just aren't that strong of cards. They're 1-mana spells, right? But within the context of secrets, and if a secret paladin deck can sustain through the standard format rotation, which, by the way, I think it will, I think this card's absolutely going to be added as one of the key secrets in that package, with the Bellringer Sentry and maybe even cards we haven't seen yet. So sure, Never Surrender looks really good for me for secret paladins and secrets for the class in general. And then up next here, we have one more paladin spell, Lightforged Blessing. 2 mana with twin spell, and it reads, give a friendly minion lifesteal. So this card has some kind of ridiculous applications. If you think about things like Glass Knight, where giving that lifesteal gives it this sort of infinite divine shield opportunity, which is kind of crazy. But outside of that very limited scenario, I do think a card like this is going to have trouble finding a home. At the end of the day, lifesteal's best when you can force it. So if you can give it to like a taunt minion, and your opponents kind of have to trade into it, or maybe a rush or charge minion so they get the lifesteal immediately, that's going to be best. If you just like drop it on a big minion that's not attacking immediately, your opponent can just remove that minion, or maybe just ignore that minion and go face, and the heal won't be as impactful. And we've seen a handful of different lifesteal cards that are like that just kind of sit there and don't really contribute as much. It's like lifesteal on Zilliax that feels the best, because it's happening immediately. It has taunt, it has rush. Like, that's the combination that feels really good. So the question is how many good targets are there going to be for a card like this? And then is it worth 2 mana to buff that multiple times, right? I mean, the nice part is you're kind of getting a free extra card here, and you might have 2 mana laying around to spare occasionally, so you toss it on a card and you feel okay. But you still kind of have to run the card in your deck. You've got opportunity cost there. What could you be doing instead? Are there better options? I think it's going to be hard to squeeze this into a deck. Like, most decks are going to be like, well, it's probably okay, I could run it, but there's something I'd rather do instead. Now, we are hitting a standard format rotation. The power level is decreasing. We don't really know what cards are going to exist in the game as competitive cards right now. So if this card's ever going to see play, it's probably going to be immediately in some kind of deck, control deck, or maybe a healed deck that likes it a lot. And will probably fall away after that. Like, I think after more and more cards are in the pool, this just doesn't make the cut anymore. It's not competitive enough. So, yeah, maybe it sees a little bit of play shortly after the expansion hits. But at the end of the day, I don't think this is a card that's going to be that strong or that meaningful to Paladin long term, unless something crazy, even more than Glass Knight, comes along to empower it. I think it'll probably just fall a little short. So next up here, let's talk about Madame Lazul. I know this one came out a while ago, but I missed it in between my last 2 reviews. I forgot to toss it in to the last one. So we're catching up here with Madame Lazul, 3 mana, 3/2 priest, legendary villain here. Battle cry reads, discover a copy of a card in your opponent's hand. So we have here a very simple resource generator, a 3 mana, 3/2 that draws you a card. But of course, it's not just your average everyday card. It's something from your opponent's hand, which can offer a couple distinct advantages. Number one, you get some informational assets, like you not only see the card you're getting, but you see 2 other cards in their hand. So suddenly a large chunk of their hand is visible to you, which can help you play around things, help you identify whether or not they have their win condition. I think that has value. I think it has less value than I used to think it had. Like, I thought Chameleos was going to be insane. At the end of the day, Chameleos can be helpful, but it's not like the most valuable thing ever to know what's in your opponent's hand. Good Hearthstone players in particular often kind of have a good idea anyway what their opponent is playing with. So I guess I'm discounting the informational advantage a little bit here. I think it's worth something, but not a ton. That said, just discovering a copy of a card in your opponent's deck can still be good because you're getting a cool resource and you're getting to pick what it is. So you might get something that synergizes really nicely with your deck, or you get their big win condition or whatever it is, right? There are opportunities there. Now, I think one challenge for Madame Lazul is that it's not really disrupting your opponent so much as adding opportunities to you. So she doesn't like give you a way to win the game. She kind of just helps you follow along whatever your opponent's doing. And I think we've seen a lot of the times in Hearthstone's past, at least, decks that are more self-driven find a lot of success. If they have a game plan that they're trying to execute, that's better than just being reactive all the time. Reactive decks can have a hard time keeping up with all the different things going on. So I worry that she's more on the reactive side as opposed to the proactive side, and she's not really helping you do anything consistently, predictably, or reliably. But that said, she's just a good way to cycle into new cards, a resource generator. So I think she's going to be good. I'm probably a little less excited about this card than a lot of people. She's always going to get played. Like, there's a 99% chance this card gets played, but I don't think it's ever like a significant part of your deck where you feel like you have to have it. It's just one of those cards that's good enough to add into your list. So most, mid-range to control style priest decks will find space for this because it's good, but it's not going to be the best card in your deck. It's not going to be the card that wins you the games. It's not going to be the one that defines the archetypes. So I think it's probably going to end up being like a 3-star card, which I know will make some people mad, but I just don't think she's strong enough. She's consistent, absolutely will be played, no question there, but she's not going to be like the card for priest moving forward. So now let's move on to Evil Conscriptor, a 2-mana 2/2 for priest with a death rattle that reads add a lackey to your hand. So we have here another little resource generator, but when I compare this card to other, cheap death rattle minions, it has a couple problems to me. It's not tempo oriented. You're not adding that minion to the board, right? You're just generating this resource in hand. Priest has had a few of those in the past, right, that will draw them cards, essentially. Even like Loot Hoarder is the classic staple there across all classes, where it draws you a card from your deck. And often a card from your deck is going to be much stronger than a lackey to your hand. There's nothing wrong with a lackey. They're good cards. They're a little bit better than their cost would imply. But at the end of the day, they just don't have that much raw output. And they're coming at a delay here because of the death rattle on Evil Conscriptor 2. So for the most part, you're sacrificing quite a bit here in stats with Evil Conscriptor. Like you're losing a health or attack and some upside that you typically see on a card. And the lackey doesn't really help make that up all that much. It's kind of just an even trade here for mana efficiency standpoint. So unless your deck is really specifically trying to utilize lackeys in some way, I just don't know that the Evil Conscriptor does enough. Like, would you rather just run a Knife Juggler or something in a lot of decks, right? Who knows? I don't think you'd really need Evil Conscriptor specifically all that often. It just kind of feels like a 2/2 with a little bit of upside, and there are other two-mana cards with more upside that exist in Hearthstone that probably move you in a more defined direction. Like if you're a control deck, maybe you just run Doomsayer instead, right? If you're like a board-based deck, the Knife Juggler option exists. Sometimes even just a River Crocolisk might be better than Evil Conscriptor because you get the stats immediately and it takes better trades. So at the end of the day, I'm just left wondering, like, why is this card going to make the cut, right? What is it about this lackey that makes the Evil Conscriptor so good? So is there anything wrong with it? No, not at all. And if there's a Death Rattle synergy for Priest that comes out, we've had the quest in the past, something new pops up that makes a lot of sense, sure, a card like this could make a ton of sense. And maybe run it in Wild, too. I don't know. But for standard format right now, I'm just not seeing it unless there's a really strong lackey support card where you just have to generate enough lackeys. In that case, it'll be fine. But beyond that, it just kind of looks below average to me. So up next, let's talk about the Evil Genius, a card that's kind of similar to our last one, but I like a little more. This one's a 2-mana 2/2 for Warlock. Its battle cry reads, destroy a friendly minion and then add 2 random lackeys to your hand. So you might be thinking, whoa, this is way worse. You got to destroy a friendly minion. That's a really big tempo sacrifice. And it could be, you're right. But as we've seen in Warlock in the past, often destroying a friendly minion isn't that big of a deal for Warlock. They can be happy to do that. We saw it with like Possessed Lackey before, or with egg decks where you're happy to destroy an egg. There are these sort of buff-style sacrificial warlocks running around out there with cards like Grim Rally that aren't super popular, but have still seen some competitive play, even in this current meta. And I suspect with cards like Evil Genius coming, they'll get even more competitive moving forward. Now, with Evil Genius, it's still a problem where you're not really contributing a ton of tempo or board presence. It's still about generating resources with the lackeys in your hand, but you get 2 this time, and if you want to achieve this battle cry, if your deck is built to take advantage of this battle cry, that could be a pretty strong play too. Destroying an egg would be a really good thing, and that would help you make this a tempo style card because you're putting some extra stats into play immediately. And then you also have the lackey upside. And with 2 lackeys, you're just more consistently going to get ones that matter, ones that make an impact, and it gives you a better on-curve sort of follow-up play, right? Like you can at least spend 2 mana the following turn if you have to in these lackeys, and lackeys sometimes require one another to work well because they have like buffs that buff other minions. So 2 is much, much better than 1 when it comes to lackeys. So for me, Evil Genius looks considerably stronger than the Evil Conscriptor. I just think it lines up better with a potential game plan for Warlock. The lackey upside is higher, the stat line is the same. So when I compare these 2 cards 1-to-1, like Genius just makes a lot more sense to me for its class than does Conscriptor. Neither are terrible by any means. I think they're both okay, but this one seems to have more opportunities to see play. So now let's move on to the Hinch Clan Hogsteed, a new neutral 2-drop here. It has Rush. It's a 2/1 beast, and it has Death Rattle summon a 1/1 Murloc. So, you know, this card I think is surprisingly intriguing. You don't expect to see like neutral 2-drops that look kind of cool, but I could see some decks that make a lot of sense with this card. It is a beast first and foremost, so you know there is that like hunter option here, and a 2/1 with Rush means it could take some nice early game trades, and the fact that it has a Death Rattle that leaves behind a minion, that's not bad either. So you're getting a decent little pile of stats. It's no like Haunted Creeper, right? The kind of staple Death Rattle 2-drop beast of old, but it does some things that are similar, and it probably, in this era of Hearthstone, looks like a competitive 2-drop. I don't think we're going to have that many strong 2-drops. Keleseth moves out, 2-drops make sense again. I don't know, this one looks pretty good. Like, and even if I'm a priest, by the way, why would I run Evil Conscriptor over Hench-Clan Hogsteed? I'm not sure that I would. I think I'd rather just get the instant impact of the Rush and the 1/1 minion on board immediately as opposed to having to spend mana on it with a lackey from hand. Of course, some lackeys have a lot of upside with Discover a Spell, but that's inconsistent and unpredictable. So to me, this looks like the right kind of Death Rattle 2-drop. And sure, I could see some different decks running this. Maybe some Zoo decks, maybe some Hunter decks that like the Beast aspect, Death Rattle decks that just want to have tokens or minions around on board. All of those make sense, and because of the Rush, it's a card that takes some quick trades too onto early game boards, killing your Evil Genius or Evil Conscriptor. Is it always going to work? No. Is every deck going to want to run this? Of course not. But it's a solid looking little card that could definitely see some play. All right, so that wraps it up for our detailed reviews. Now let's jump into the quick reviews. Jepetto Joybuzz is a 4-star card. Vereesa Windrunner is a 3-star card. Unleash the Beast is a 3-star card. Keeper Stalladris is a 4-star card. Bronze Herald is a 3-star card. Dragon Speaker is a 3-star card. Never Surrender is a 4-star card. Lightforged Blessing is a 2-star card. Madame Lazul is a 4-star card. Evil Conscriptor is a 2-star card. Evil Genius is a 3-star card. Hinch Clan Hogsteed is a 3-star card. And there you go, folks. Part 6 is done. If you have thoughts on these cards, of course, I want to hear them in the comments below. But until then, thank you so much for watching. And until next time, game on.